Lumbar lordosis is a very common postural position that has your lower back fixed in extension, and it kind of looks something like this. And although your body is an extremely adaptable system, having an excessive lumbar lordosis can lead to breathing issues, lower back discomfort, and can even impair certain parts of your movement. So in this video, we are going to dive into how excessive lumbar lordosis gets created in the first place, as well as go over a few different exercises that you can go through to hopefully reduce some of that excessive curve in the lower spine. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. So what are some of the underlying mechanical reasons as to why you might be fixed in this lumbar lordosis to begin with? What you'll often commonly hear is that the erectors or maybe the QLs are quite tight, and it's pulling the pelvis potentially into an anterior tilt, creating this lordotic positioning. And although that is partially true, we have to always keep in mind that the body is always trying to find some level of center. So if one joint is getting pushed into an extreme range of motion, the body is going to try to counter that by taking another part of your body to an extreme range of motion to hopefully find that midpoint. And in this case, what's happening in through your lower back with that excessive extension is actually more of a byproduct of something that's happening downstream. And typically, more often than not, if we look at the knees, when you are fixed in extension here, the knees are likely going to be fixed in extension. So I would say even beyond extension, we can call that hyperextension. And as the knees get pushed back into hyperextension, it takes your center of mass forward. Now, our body doesn't want to fall forward, so it has to counter that by actually falling backwards. So you can see if I overly extend my knees and I take my center of mass forward, in order to inhibit myself from going here, I have to start to lean back. And what this starts to promote is that excessive lumbar extension that you start to see. So a couple things that we're going to want to be mindful of here is where the rib cage is in relation to the hips. Can we build more of a neutral base? If I'm here, can I start to build more of a neutral base between those two? And can we also start to synergize that with having more neutrality around a soft bend of the knees? Because until we start to fix some of that excessive extension through the knees and where our center of mass is, we're always going to find ourselves here. So what we're going to start to work into is some exercises that are going to create a sense of expansion and space in through your posterior ribs, as well as get into an exercise that will hopefully start to work on some of that hyperextension that is potentially happening through your knees as well. So for our first exercise, we're going to be working on creating a sense of expansion and space in through our back ribs in an attempt to hopefully neutralize some of that excessive curve that you may be dealing with back there. You can imagine that anything really beyond like 4 to about 8 degrees in terms of a lumbar curve is probably too much. We do certainly want some level of lordosis through there. We don't want it to be totally flat, but we do want to kind of be within that healthy range. So what we're going to do is you're going to need a wall. And that's about it. You don't even have to have a wall, but it is helpful here in terms of feedback. And what we're going to do is take our feet onto the back wall. You're going to walk your hands out so you're slightly in front of your shoulders to begin with. Now you're going to keep your feet up against the wall. I'm going to angle off here a little bit just so you can see me directly from the side. So my hands are slightly in front. Knees are more or less underneath the hips. And then you're going to begin to take your center of mass forward so you're a little bit on top of your hands. Now, one thing that we're going to want to be mindful of when we're here is that we're not feeding extension. And what that would look like is if I started to bring my center of mass forward and then I started to do, we'll say something like that. We want to be mindful that we're actually keeping a little bit more of this shape here without collapsing the sternum and doing anything odd here like so. So once we kind of have this position set, we're going to start to work on a breathing cycle that has proven to be quite helpful for creating space in through these back ribs. So if I'm in a lot of extension, you may want to start with doing a slight posterior tilt, just a slight tuck without excessively squeezing your glutes. And then you're going to begin to take a inhale through over the course of about 5 seconds. And on the exhale, this is where we're going to start to compact and create a little bit of tension in through the front side of our abs. So you're going to pull your lower belly back and you're going to create some contraction there. So what that will look like is I'll go exhale. Now there's a little bit of a squeeze there. I'm going to maintain the squeeze as you take an inhale, think around that feedback. So I'm going to keep some of that. I'm going to gently start to take an inhale. And then on the exhale, you're going to try to build on that. So I'll go back into the exhale, lower belly will come in. I have a little bit of that squeeze. I will maintain as I come back into the inhale. And then the whole cycle would repeat from there. What you're trying to be mindful of and kind of aim for is that your belly just doesn't distend back out, because that is going to pull you back into extension. You're really trying to keep this feedback through here. And if you execute this well, what you'll find is that through the contraction and the maintenance of a little bit of tension here, you can start to access pressure in through your back ribs. I call this creating a wall of resistance. You can imagine if you create some feedback or tension for pressure to come into, it has no direction to go but backwards and even potentially laterally. So work on that aspect of maintaining some of that tension, and you should start to feel as if your back ribs start to open up. What I'd recommend here is working through it for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and it should be reasonably fatiguing. By the end of that, you should feel like you not only got some work in through your abdominal muscles, but also that you got some space and expansion through your back ribs. So for this next exercise, we're going to be working on a variation of a deep lunge to hopefully work on some of this potential hyperextension that is happening through your knees that is potentially feeding this excessive lordosis. So you can grab yourself a broomstick, a dowel. You don't necessarily have to have one if you want to challenge yourself more, but you can use this as assistance to begin with. So what we're going to do is take the dowel into the opposite hand of the leg that you have in front. In this case, it is my right leg. And what we're going to be working on is initially creating some of that breath that we just created in the quad pad. So cycle through that a couple times, kind of get a feel for it. And what we're going to begin to do is get heavy onto this lead leg. So this is where most of my weight is. And then what we're going to start to do is drop your hips down as low as you comfortably can, keeping weight on this lead leg. Now we're going to start to stand up. And what I want you to be mindful of, especially as you approach this range of motion here, is that you don't immediately start doing this. Because you can see how I just overly extended my knee backwards, and it's likely going to put you right back into that position of excessive lordosis, which we are trying to kind of recondition or repattern. So as we're coming out of this bottom position and I feel grounded through this lead leg, I'm going to begin to stand up, and at about this point, I'm going to be mindful that my knee doesn't start to overly extend, but rather my hips actually start to track forward. So my hips are actually coming more on top of my knee. I'm keeping 90 to 95% of my weight here. You can see I barely have any weight on that back leg. And then we can reinitiate the movement by sitting the hips back, starting to sit down again. You're keeping your upper body relatively vertical, being mindful here that you're not in overextension even at this bottom position. So you kind of have a good neutral base between the pelvis and the ribs. And then you're working on smoothly standing up and getting used to this sensation of the knee actually being in a soft bend while the hips kind of arrive in extension on top of it. And the intention here over time is that as I condition and kind of program this into my body, that I can come all the way up, and in a standing position, my knees are more or less at neutral. Ideally, we want a small bend. We don't want to be here, obviously, but we also don't want to live all the way back here either. So we want to kind of find that soft bend, and over time, that is going to help to reorganize kind of where our center of mass is in space and give our body an idea as to where more of that neutral base can exist from. So alongside some of your deep tissue work where you are breaking up some of that feeling of tightness around the lower back, it is important to complement any soft tissue or massage or IMS with some form of corrective exercise. That way, you're giving your body an underlying framework of how you want it to better support you, as well as move through space. And alongside your corrective work, it's important to have some level of strength training, because what good is getting our body positionally where we want it to be, but then negating the fact that we do want some tone of both the muscle and connective tissue to be able to hopefully support and suspend ourselves there for a longer period of time. Anyways, that is going to wrap this week's video on excessive lumbar lordosis. Hopefully you learned a few new things. If you did, you can like, you can subscribe, do all the YouTube things, and you can go check out another video I did on the body in some way right